Think about a morning when no one else was home. Not a crisis, not a loss, just a morning, perhaps after someone left for work early, or before anyone else woke up, or during one of those quiet intervals that arrive without announcement. The house was still. The light came in at a particular angle. There was no sound except what you made yourself. Did you reach for the phone? Or did you sit with it? That small moment, that instinct, that choice, contains something important. Because how you feel in those quiet intervals says something about a distinction that many people have never had to think about carefully. A distinction that, as life grows quieter and the days become less structured, becomes one of the most important you will encounter. The difference between being alone and being lonely. These two things have been confused with each other for so long that most people use them almost interchangeably. To be alone, many assume, is to risk being lonely. Loneliness is seen as the natural consequence of solitude, its shadow, its punishment, the thing that waits at the end of too much quiet. And so the silence is treated as a warning sign, something to be monitored, managed, broken before it becomes a problem. But that is not what they are. They are not different intensities of the same experience. They are different experiences entirely. As different, in fact, as hunger and fasting. Both involve the absence of food, but one is involuntary and uncomfortable, a signal from the body that something is wrong, something that must be addressed. The other is a chosen relationship with that absence, one that can bring clarity, discipline, and even a strange kind of satisfaction. Loneliness is what you feel when you want connection and cannot find it. It is a signal, like pain, or cold, or the ache of being hungry. It tells you that something necessary is missing. It asks for a response. And when that response does not come, when the phone stays silent, when the house stays empty, when no one asks how you are or seems to notice that you have not been heard in a while, it moves from discomfort to something heavier. It becomes an ache, a weight you carry with you into rooms that feel too large, into evenings that feel too long, into the small private moments when you realize that a day has passed and you have not truly spoken to anyone about anything that matters. Solitude is different. Solitude is the experience of being alone without wanting to be anywhere else. It is the quiet room you chose. It is the walk you took by yourself and did not wish someone had come along. It is the morning you spent in your own thoughts, without direction or agenda, and came back from it feeling more like yourself than you had in weeks. The trouble is that modern life has done its best to make these two things indistinguishable. We live in a culture that has surrounded aloneness with anxiety, as if to be alone is already to be in danger, already to be losing something, already to be falling behind in some invisible social accounting. As if the quiet itself is a problem to be solved, a void to be filled before it becomes something worse. And when the quiet arrives, whether we chose it or not, we are handed 100 tools designed to make sure we never have to sit with it for too long. But some of the most important things we can learn about ourselves only come in silence. Today, we are going to spend some time with that silence. We are going to look at what loneliness actually is, what solitude actually is, how the two became confused, and why learning to distinguish them may be one of the most useful things a person can do in the second half of their life. Not as a self-improvement exercise, not as a list of things to practice, but as a quiet and honest examination of something most people feel and very few have words for. Because if you have ever felt lonely in a room full of people, you already know that connection and company are not the same thing. And if you have ever sat alone and felt, against your own expectations, at peace, you already know that solitude and isolation are not the same thing either. The question is what we do with that knowledge, and whether, in a world that is afraid of quiet, we are willing to slow down long enough to find out. There is a certain kind of quiet that older generations, new and younger ones, no longer do. It was the quiet of a Sunday afternoon in the 1960s or 1970s, when the shops were closed, the telephone did not ring unless someone had a real reason to call, and there was nothing much to do except be where you were. Read, sit in the garden, think about something without finishing it, walk somewhere without a destination. Let the afternoon pass without filling it. The silence in those days was not a problem. It was simply the texture of the day. That kind of afternoon sounds almost impossible now. Not because people are busier, though many are, but because the architecture of modern life has been redesigned around the assumption that silence is something to be filled. The phone in your pocket. The notification that arrives at 3 in the afternoon with something that might be urgent, or might be nothing, but is at least something. The constant low hum of background content, news, music, podcasts, a voice in a podcast telling you something interesting, that follows most people through their days like a soundtrack they forgot they chose. The technological revolution of the last 20 years did many remarkable things. It connected people across distances that would have seemed unthinkable a generation earlier. It put access to knowledge, to music, to the voices of people you love, inside a device that fits in your pocket. These are not nothing. These are extraordinary, but one of the quieter effects of that revolution, the one least written about and perhaps most deeply felt, was the near elimination of ordinary aloneness. Before smartphones, before social media, before the expectation of continuous availability that now pervades every part of professional and personal life, a person could be genuinely unreachable. Not in a dramatic way, just in the ordinary way. You left the house and you were gone. You sat in a waiting room and you waited, with your own thoughts. You lay awake at night with whatever the night brought you. You drove to work without anyone talking into your ear. These were not moments of isolation. They were simply the normal experience of being a person in a world that had not yet decided to fill every gap. And within those gaps, something happened. Something that is hard to describe unless you remember it. There was a kind of mental texture that came from uninterrupted time. Time when your thoughts moved at their own pace, without being directed, without being interrupted, without competing with anything external. Memory arrived uninvited. Old conversations surfaced and you saw them differently. You noticed things about yourself and the world that only become visible when there is nothing else demanding your attention. It was in those gaps that people processed grief, slowly and without a program. It was where decisions got reconsidered quietly. Where someone understood something about a relationship that they had not been able to see while they were in the middle of it. Where ideas arrived. Where a long afternoon of boredom gave way, unexpectedly, to something that felt like peace. Those gaps have largely been closed now, and most people barely noticed the exchange. The filling of silence happened so gradually, and the tools that filled it were so genuinely useful, that the loss was invisible. You did not lose the quiet all at once. You traded it away in small amounts, one notification at a time, one podcast episode at a time, one short video at a time. And then one day you realized you could not remember the last time you had been in your own thoughts for more than a few minutes without reaching for something to listen to or look at. But the mind noticed, and the self noticed, and perhaps most clearly, the experience of being alone changed as a result. Because being alone now does not look like what it used to look like. To be alone now is often to be alone with a screen, which is its own kind of company, its own kind of noise. It prevents the very thing solitude used to make possible, the encounter with yourself. Not the managed, curated self you present to others, and not the distracted self scrolling through other people's lives. The actual self, the one that has things to say when you stop talking over it. And alongside this, something else happened. Loneliness became epidemic. The two facts are connected. When solitude is crowded out, when genuine aloneness is replaced by the simulation of connection, people do not become less lonely. They often become more so. The social media feed gives the appearance of company without the substance of it. You see what people had for lunch, what they think about the news, how they are presenting their lives to be looked at. But you are not known. You are not held. Nothing passes between you and the lives on your screen except attention, and attention is not the same as love. The notification gives the illusion of being thought about without anyone actually thinking about you. The constant availability paradoxically creates a world where no one is ever truly present, not to others, and certainly not to themselves. The result is a world where many people are technically never alone, and yet feel profoundly, persistently lonely. Consider two people. The first is a woman in her early 60s whose children have grown and moved away. She lives alone in the house where they all used to live together. She wakes in the morning to silence. She eats most meals by herself. She goes to bed without the sound of other people in the house. By most external measures, she is alone. But ask her, and she will tell you she is not, as a rule, lonely. She tends a small garden in the early morning before it gets hot. She reads in the evenings, real books, the kind that take weeks. She calls her daughter on Sundays, and they talk for a long time about things that matter. She has a friend she has known since her 30s, and they see each other every few weeks, and when they do, they pick up exactly where they left off as if no time has passed at all. She has learned, over time, that the quiet of her house is not an absence. It is a space she inhabits, one she has come to know well. She knows where the light comes in at different hours. She knows which corner of the garden is most peaceful in the afternoon. She knows the particular quality of the silence on a winter morning versus a summer one. The house is not empty to her. It is full of her own presence, her own rhythms, her own quiet and unhurried life. Now consider the second person. He is in his late 50s and still working. He comes home most evenings to a partner and two teenagers. The house is full, phones, conversations, the television in the background, the ordinary noise of a family that is busy and alive. He is surrounded by people he loves, or at least by people who are there, which is not always the same thing. And yet there are moments, driving home from the office, or waking at 2 in the morning when the house is finally still, when he feels a loneliness so specific and so quiet that it would embarrass him to describe it. A feeling that no one in the house really knows what he thinks about in those early morning hours. That the conversations they have are the surface of something much deeper that never gets said. That he has been, in some fundamental way, inside his own head alone for a very long time, even in company, even in the middle of dinner, even in the bed beside someone he has shared a life with for 25 years. These two people are living the distinction this entire video is about. Loneliness is not about how many people surround you. It is about whether you feel understood. Whether you feel that there is someone, even one person, even one small corner of the world, where you are genuinely known. Where you do not have to perform, translate, manage, or present a version of yourself that is acceptable. Where you can simply be what you are, fully, including the parts that are uncertain or contradictory or not yet resolved, and have that be enough. You can be entirely alone and not lonely, if you have those things, or if you have made some peace with yourself that provides its own version of them. And you can be surrounded by a crowd and be desperately lonely if you do not. This is why loneliness is so hard to talk about. Because it does not follow the rules we expect it to. It does not respect the logic of headcount. The retired woman who lives alone and reads and gardens and calls one person a week may be rich in exactly the things that matter, even if she is poor in proximity. The busy professional whose every hour is accounted for and whose phone never stops ringing may be starving for exactly the kind of connection that would require him to slow down and say something true. There is also a particular kind of loneliness that comes from never being alone. From never having sat with yourself long enough to know who you are when no one is watching. People who have spent their whole lives filling the quiet, with work, with obligation, with the busyness that is always available for those who want it, sometimes arrive in their 60s or 70s at the first real silence of their adult life and find it deeply disorienting. Not because silence is dangerous, but because they have no relationship with it. It is unfamiliar, uncomfortable in the way that any genuine encounter with the unknown is uncomfortable. They are strangers to themselves in that particular way, and it is one of the more unusual and seldom discussed griefs of later life. The grief of not quite knowing, after all this time, who you are when everything else has gone quiet. The cost of never being alone, in other words, is that you can become lonely in a deeper sense, estranged not just from other people, but from yourself. There is a philosopher named Hannah Arendt who made a distinction about loneliness and solitude that has always seemed to me quietly important. She wrote, in her examination of the darkest political movements of the 20th century, that loneliness at its most extreme is the experience of not belonging to the world at all. It is not simply the absence of others. It is the feeling that there is no place for you, that no connection runs between who you are and the life you are living, between yourself and the world around you. You are present, and yet you feel absent, surrounded, and yet unseen. Solitude, for Arendt, was something entirely different. Solitude was the condition in which a person could have genuine inner dialogue, could be, in her phrase, truly with oneself. It was not isolation. It was the experience of being present to your own thinking, of being in honest conversation with yourself. The person in solitude is not missing others. They are, temporarily, the company they need. This is not a mystical idea. It is, in a sense, a very practical one. Think about the decisions you have made that you later regretted, and how many of them were made in noise, in the middle of pressure, under the gaze of other people's expectations, in the rush of a moment when there was no time to be still. And then think about the insights that have come to you in quiet, in the shower, on a walk, in the middle of the night when everyone else was asleep and the day had finally let you go. The quiet is not just rest. It is a different quality of thinking. Slower, more associative, less defended. The kind of thinking that does not perform. The kind that goes somewhere true. Henry David Thoreau understood this, in his own way, more than 150 years ago. In 1845, at the age of 27, Thoreau moved to a small cabin he built himself on the edge of Walden Pond in Massachusetts. He lived there for 2 years and 2 months, deliberately, simply, and largely alone. He has been misread ever since as a misanthrope, a man who could not tolerate other people. But that was not his intention, and it was not his experience. He walked into Concord regularly. He visited friends. He had dinner at Emerson's house more often than the mythology of his solitude might suggest. What Thoreau was after was not the absence of people. It was the presence of himself. He wanted to know, he wrote, what the essential facts of life actually were. To live deliberately, not accidentally. To understand what he was doing and why. And he found that he could not do that while embedded in the noise and obligation of ordinary social life. He needed the pond. He needed the mornings that were his alone. He needed the experience of being responsible only for himself, in a space simple enough that nothing could hide. What he found there was not loneliness. It was a kind of aliveness that ordinary social life had diluted. You do not need to move to a cabin to understand what he was after. But you might need to spend a morning without looking at the phone. You might need to sit in the garden for an hour without any plan. You might need to eat a meal alone, slowly, without a screen in front of you, and see what arrives when the noise clears. What arrives, for most people, is not emptiness. What arrives is themselves. Sometimes that is uncomfortable, because we carry things we have been moving too fast to feel. Grief that has not finished. Regrets that are waiting to be acknowledged. Old conversations that ended badly and were never resolved. These are not reasons to avoid the quiet. They are reasons the quiet matters. One of the most paradoxical things about people who are comfortable alone is this. They tend to be better company. They bring something to a conversation that people who are never alone find hard to access. A kind of settled presence, a quality of actually being there, a capacity to listen without waiting to be heard. Because they have already had the internal conversation. They are not using the person in front of them to process their own noise. They are not filling the silence in the room because they cannot bear it. They can hold a pause. They can let something land before they respond. They can be interested rather than anxious. The person who can sit with themselves has something to give. The person who cannot be alone is always, in some sense, in need. And there is nothing wrong with need. We all have it, and connection requires it. But there is a difference between coming to a relationship from abundance and coming to it from scarcity. The person who has learned to be good company for themselves arrives differently. They ask less of the encounter. They are freer. This is not a moral judgment. It is an observation about what solitude produces over time. A settled familiarity with one's own mind. A reduced fear of silence. A less desperate relationship with the question of whether one is liked or approved of or included. These are not trivial things. They are, in many ways, the foundation of a life that can be faced with equanimity. There is a moment that many people describe in the later years of their lives. It arrives differently for different people. Sometimes it comes after retirement, when the structure of work disappears and a new kind of time opens up, unscheduled, undirected, belonging entirely to the person living it. Sometimes it comes after children have grown and left, when the house that used to feel full settles into a different kind of quiet. Sometimes it comes after a loss, a partner, a friend, a role that gave a person their sense of place in the world. Sometimes it simply comes with age itself, as the pace of life naturally slows and the demands on a person's attention grow fewer. The moment is this. They are alone, and they notice that they are not suffering. Not every day, not every hour, but in this particular moment, a Tuesday afternoon with nothing pressing, a quiet Sunday morning, a walk with no destination, they are alone and they are, against perhaps their own expectations, all right. More than all right, they are, for a moment, at something that feels like rest. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of arrival. The feeling of being, finally, where they actually are. There is something in that moment that deserves to be named. Because it is not nothing. It is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something. A kind of quiet companionship with oneself that had been hard to access when the days were fuller and the noise was louder. This is one of the things that later life can offer, if people allow it. Not as a consolation prize for company that is harder to find, but as a genuine dimension of experience that earlier stages of life rarely permit. When you are raising children, building a career, managing a household, the self gets crowded out for years at a time. There is always someone who needs you, somewhere you are expected to be, something that must be done before you can sit down. And that is not a complaint, it is a life, a full one. But it means that when solitude finally arrives, it can feel unfamiliar. Strange. A gift you do not quite know how to accept. The work of learning to inhabit quiet is not dramatic. It does not require retreats or philosophies or a radical reorganization of how you live. It requires something more modest, permission. Permission to sit still without calling it waste. Permission to spend an afternoon in your own thoughts without feeling that you should be doing something more useful. Permission to enjoy your own company. The particular pleasure of a morning that belongs entirely to you, without immediately interpreting that enjoyment as a sign that something in your life is missing. Because loneliness will also come. That is the honest part of this. There will be evenings when the house is quiet in the wrong way, when you want to tell someone something and there is no one to tell, when the world feels more distant than you would like, when the silence is not chosen but simply there, uninvited, like cold coming through a window you forgot to close. That is real. It matters. It is worth taking seriously rather than talking away. But loneliness and solitude are not the same visitor. One arrives uninvited and asks you to reach out, to seek, to connect with someone who can genuinely be present with you. It is a signal, and it deserves to be heard. The other arrives when you stop moving, and lets you breathe. Knowing which one is at the door changes everything about how you respond to it. The person who can tell the difference, who knows when they need more genuine connection and when they need more quiet, has something that cannot be easily taught and cannot be bought. They have a relationship with themselves. Not a perfect one, not an easy one, but a real one, built slowly over years of paying attention, of sitting still occasionally even when the phone suggested otherwise, of learning to be in their own company without requiring that company to be entertaining. That relationship is there when the phone is silent. It is there when the house is empty. It is there at 2 in the morning when everything else has gone. Perhaps the point is not to never feel lonely. Perhaps the point is to learn, slowly and without drama, how to be alone, and to discover, in that learning, that the person waiting in the quiet is someone worth spending time with.